Hello, Disney fans. Here again with my good buddy Bucky. Hey, Bucky. Yeah. We're going to be going for a ride soon. But the last video I did where Bucky guest starred, where I talked about Black Beauty, that went over really well. And I wanted to talk about some other horse movies at the suggestion of a friend of mine. And I'm going to be talking about 3 different horse movies, which I'm going to... Yes, I love you too. Which I'm going to compare to the Triple Crown of horse racing, which is the Kentucky Derby, the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness Stakes, and the Belmont Stakes. Hello, Bucky. Yes, no, you can't eat the phone, but you'll get a treat. Don't worry. And in honor of those 3 races, I'm going to be doing a talk about 3 different horse movies, starting with Justin Morgan Had a Horse. And that is the story of the foundation stallion of the Morgan breed, the first Morgan, who started it all with his descendants. I found out something really awesome. Bucky here is actually distantly related to Justin Morgan, to the horse named after him, who was originally named Figure, because Morgans were used to improve the Hackney breed. Yes, I love you. You want to get riding. Okay. I will let you go. Bucky and I will have a good ride, and I will rejoin you at my place. If you're as obsessed with horses as I am, which I'm guessing you are if you're watching this, you probably read a lot of horse books when you were a kid. And odds are good that they included the works of Marguerite Henry, who's actually a native of my home state of Wisconsin, which I think is pretty cool. Now, Marguerite Henry always loved horses, and she set out to write almost an encyclopedia describing the different horse breeds and telling little stories about them. That eventually became the Album of Horses. But now she ran into a problem. When she tried to describe the Morgan horse, he didn't seem to fit into any of the categories that she had her book organized by. He wasn't a pony, he wasn't a draft horse, he wasn't a race horse. She ended up writing a whole book just about him, and that book became Justin Morgan Had a Horse. Now, Disney picked up on this and made it into a movie that they aired in 2 parts for The Wonderful World of Disney. It's not often, in fact, it's extremely rare, that I prefer a movie to the book version of it. Disney changed this story as they changed pretty much every story that they ever made into a movie. But in this case, they actually majorly improved it, as much as I love the original book. What they did right was they focused on the relationship between Justin Morgan and the horse, which is something that the book doesn't do. And you would think, given the title, that would have been the obvious focus of it. But now, even though there's changes, the movie, the book, and history agree on one thing. Justin Morgan acquired the horse because he was in major debt. And the only way he could pay that off was by going to visit a friend/relative who owed him money. And when he tried that, he was told, sorry, but there's no money to pay you back with. Oh, I know. You take these 2 horses, and maybe you could sell them for the money that's owed you. One of them is this big, strong horse that I'm sure you'll have no trouble at all selling. And the other's this little shrimpy colt who's not good for anything, really, with his little size, but you might be able to get some money for him. But this being a Disney story, guess which horse we're going to be talking about? Now, one thing that the movie gets right that the book doesn't go into is, of course, Justin Morgan was known as a school teacher and a composer, but he also knew something about horse breeding and wanted to improve horses through breeding better ones. He recognized what a good colt he'd been given. Now, the movie changes the fact that he owed debts to several different people to him owing one man, Squire Fisk. And when Fisk sees that horse, the little horse that becomes known as Figure, he is absolutely disgusted by him. And he says, no, this horse is not going to be enough to repay your debt, not by a long shot.
He's a misfit, a runt. I'll give you $1 for him. Tanner might offer a pittance for his hide.
His hide?
When he hears that, Morgan basically tells Fisk, "You go stick your dollar. I'll hang on to the horse and I'll pay you back some other way." This is not quite how it happened in real life. Morgan wasn't the type of person who would ever have sold Figure for slaughter. He was known to be a very good man. In fact, there's actually a court record of him being prosecuted for helping a slave escape. So, he actually practiced what he preached. He was a hymn writer, known to be a very religious man, but he was never hypocritical about it. He was a very good person, and he was thoughtful of the well-being of his horse. The book has him more interested in renting out Figure to get money that way from people who didn't have a horse of their own but were willing to pay him to borrow Figure to use in their fields and for whatever else they might need. The movie has more of him realizing what a great horse Figure is and how he can actually improve on horse breeding. Real life would probably have been in between. Like I said, Morgan was in debt, he needed money, but he also did recognize a good horse when he saw one. Well, the movie talks a bit about his dreams for breeding a horse that's good for everything.
This cult. You teach at school, writing music. Isn't that enough for you? You know, ever since I've known you, you've talked about raising horses as well. Well, you know me and horses. Oh, yes, and all-purpose horses, I remember. Riding, working, drawing the carriage. Could be done.
That's actually what the Morgan breed is really well known for. They're good at everything. They're just as good for pleasure riding pony as they are for driving a carriage, for doing farm work, pulling a plow. You name it, a Morgan can do it. And that's actually pretty special when you think of the types of horses that are used for riding, more light built horses as opposed to a farm work horse, something that's much heavier built. There weren't a lot of options if you wanted a horse that could do everything around the farm. Now, there's something else that Morgans are really well known for, and that's their wonderful, gentle disposition, especially with children. These are real babysitter horses. You can put the baby on their back, go in the house, do whatever, come back in a couple hours. The baby's going to be fine. And it shows Figure's gentle nature when all the kids who, of course, fall in love with him right away can't focus on school because they want to go out and play with him.
It was evident to Morgan that skittish was one thing that Figure would never be.
This is actually a really good idea with a young horse. Let them get used to things. Let them see, oh, this isn't going to hurt me. Figure's not afraid that the kids are going to hurt him. He's used to crowds like that. He gets used to it very quickly. And something like that would probably scare a lot of horses. A bunch of kids just descending on him. Oh, hi, Figure, come on, let's play. The horse is going to be like, oh, big crowd here, what's going on? But not Figure. He's used to this. Like the movie says, he's never going to be a skittish horse. That's something that my own Bucky never got the chance to have when he was going through his young training. The home he was in before I bought him, his last owner even gave rules not to stand in front of his stall because it might upset him. If you've got a horse like that, you need to desensitize them to things. Morgan knows what he's doing when it comes to training Figure. Not so much when it comes to romance. He's in love with a young lady named Kathleen, who happens to be an indentured servant. He's putting off marrying her until he can save up enough to buy off her indenture, which is going to take a while, and she's not too happy about that. Justin really is thinking of his future with her. He knows that if Figure turns out to be as good as he can tell he's going to be, they can build a future on that, not just on Figure, but on his descendants. First step to that, though, is proving that Figure actually is worth something. He starts to do that when he's out driving Figure in a cart one day, and he comes across Squire Fisk driving his prize horse Midnight at the same time. They get into a little race, and Figure wins big time. As you can imagine, Fisk isn't too happy about Morgan's little runt beating his horse, and he demands that Morgan put Figure to work, starting to pay him back. And not only was Morgan in debt to him to start with, but he's gotten even more in debt to him because Fisk owns all the oats, horseshoes, and everything else that Figure needs in town. So that debt's just been increasing. The work that's asked of Figure is hard, but he proves himself to be able to do it. Now, this happened a little bit differently in real life. Like I said, Morgan hired Figure out to people who needed a horse to do their work. At first, nobody wanted him, and he's a little shrimp, he ain't gonna be able to do what I need. But eventually, people thought, well, I need a horse, and he's something, so I'll rent him. And when they did, they found out he could really work. And it surprises everybody except Morgan in the movie version when they find out just how good at pulling Figure really is.
Hey, can you picture old Fisk thinking he's being outdone? Switch up, Midnight! Whoa, Figure!
Not only is Figure capable of hauling a heavy load, he runs off with a tree that wasn't even uprooted yet. This tree isn't even down. He's hooked up to it and he just hauls it off like it's nothing. Pretty soon, he's doing the work that horses a lot bigger than him can't do. Now, the book describes pulling contests which were put on for fun back in the day. The movie shows it as him taking over for a horse that simply could not move this one tree. People think that an ox is what's needed to haul that there's no way any horse could move it. Figure is hooked up to it, and people start taking bets on whether he can move it. Not only does he move the log, he hauls it with 3 people aboard it.
Hold on. Here we go. Hey, come on, horse. All right, now, Figure. Never. Ready? Aye. It's not too fast, horse. That's it. Come on. Come on. Come on. This way. Attaboy. That's it. All right. Move this way. Come on, Figure. Hi! Come on, Figure. That's it. Move. That's it. Come on, Figure. Come on.
This is another thing that is true to life. Figure beat oxen in pulling contests. This little horse that nobody thought was worth anything is out pulling huge oxen. To be fair, in this instance, one thing that helped him was actually the weight of the men on the tree, because they sat near the end to help give it the leverage to be easier to get out of where it was sunk in. But that was still a pretty heavy load for a horse his size to pull. Add in the weight of 3 men aboard. Yeah, that was still a pretty impressive feat. Well, by now, nobody's laughing at Figure anymore. But they figure that even though Figure is a really good workhorse, probably not that much in the racing department. And people in their free time race horses to just have fun the same way people would go to a horse race today. Although, of course, back then, there weren't a lot of the scandals involved in horse racing like there are today. But I'll talk more about that in an upcoming video where I talk about Secretariat, which I'm going to do for Belmont Week. But back to topic, Figure starts being entered in races, and people start to realize just how fast he is. And Morgan's friend starts to break him up pretty good.
Now, Evans, you mentioned the finest. You get a horse in the Princess class, if you can find one.
Figure can outpull and outtrout and outrun any horse around these parts, and if he had wings, he'd be outflying the Hawks.
This leads to a challenge. Squire Fisk has the best racehorse in the area, Princess Grey Dawn. If Figure can beat her in a race, that proves he's the best racehorse around. There isn't an official race, nothing that anybody's bet any money on, nothing that has any prize or anything. But Princess Grey Dawn's exercise rider says, "Bring Figure over. I'm going to be exercising Princess Grey Dawn tomorrow morning. Let's have ourselves a little impromptu race here. See who actually is the faster horse." And Figure again proves what he's capable of. Figure's reputation is now official. He is the best horse around at pulling a carriage, at pulling heavy loads for work, at racing. There's no horse that can beat him. But it's not always good to be the best. Squire Fisk has to have the best horses around. He knows that's Figure. He also has the legal right to seize him as part of Justin's debt to him. And that's exactly what he does.
I'll allow $100 for that horse. And I've never paid so much for an animal before, but I want no talk of cheating here. Is that fair? I ask you if that was fair, Morgan. We can always call in a constable to decide on a sum.
I wouldn't sell Figure for any price. If you're taking him, you're taking him.
Of course, Justin is just heartbroken over this. Everybody knows what kind of a bond he has with Figure. And the whole town basically takes a stand against it in the only way they can. Kathleen works for Squire Fisk as his indentured servant, and she makes sure his meals are basically inedible. People start throwing rocks at Squire Fisk's other horses to make them spook when he's out driving them. Which, even though I like seeing Squire Fisk get his comeuppance, that's not good for the poor horse. So I'm not in favor of that part. But basically the whole town takes their business elsewhere. They fight back in every way they can to let him know just what they think of him for what he did. Well, the whole town might have gone on doing that. Morgan might have gone on being heartbroken, and Figure isn't any happier. He'll work for the Squire, but he's not putting his heart into it like he would for Justin. Now, this might have gone on for a long time, except for two people from New York who come. They've heard all about what a great racehorse Figure is, and they decide to match him against their horses.
To challenge you, to prove the superiority of our blooded stock over the mongrel-bred Figure. I'll give you $50 for your trouble, win or lose. All you gotta do is sign this agreement, and you can get $50 real easy. If you don't mind losing. Nobody ever beats him.
In Marguerite Henry's book, she mentions the letter that Morgan got challenging Figure to this race. I don't know if that letter is actually historically copied from the real one or not, if that real letter still exists. But she did do a lot of extensive work into the history of the Morgan breed before she wrote it. And I find it interesting that they mention him being mongrel bred. There's nothing wrong with a horse that has more than one breed combination in it. but because Figure was so unique at that time. They were curious what combination of breeds went into making him. What made this one-of-a-kind horse? If you go to the website allbreedpedigree.com, it does give a pedigree for him, listing him under the name of Justin Morgan, the name that he came to be called later in life. People started calling him after his most famous owner. That pedigree lists a lot of thoroughbred in Figure, with a little bit of Arabian mixed in, and one horse referred to as a Dutch horse. If I said Dutch horse among horse circles today, people would probably think I was talking about either a Dutch warmblood or a Dutch harness horse. Those are not what people at that time would have called a Dutch horse. That would have been a little more compact horse, a lot more like Morgan's are built. I don't know how much thoroughbred he had in him because he was absolutely not built like a thoroughbred. But there are a lot of sources that agree on his parentage. And there's another interesting fact there. Figure's mother, we do know, was a horse either called Daughter of Diamond or Wild Diamond. Her sire was a famous horse called Diamond, at least famous locally in Vermont at that time. And that horse's direct ancestor, was bred by Morgan himself. So there again you have the tie that Morgan would probably have known a fair bit about this is going to be a quality horse based on his breeding, and the idea again that Morgan wasn't just somebody who happened to fall in with this colt. He did get him his payment on a debt, but he also did know quite a bit about horses. Now, back to the story. Morgan has to tell him in this version, I don't own Figure anymore. Go talk to Squire Fisk. Morgan's had it with the whole area. He can't stand to be around and see Figure in Fisk's hands. He's going to leave town, but he can't do it before one last ride on Figure. Justin Morgan is played by Don Murray. I couldn't find anything of him, anything of his work that I'm familiar with. But I do really enjoy his acting in here, and watching this scene, I have to say, that is some excellent writing. And it's really him doing it. And I wish I looked that good when I ride Bucky. His back is straight, he's moving with the horse. He really looks like a competent rider. And there are a lot of actors who struggle with that. I don't know if he rode in his free time otherwise, if he had any kind of formal riding training, but I've taken riding lessons for years. I've owned Bucky for close to 2 years now. And yeah, I don't look that good. So kudos to him for being an excellent actor and an excellent rider. Now, Squire Fisk sees this and realizes Figure's doing a lot more for him than he'll do for anyone else. If he wants to win this race, he's going to need Morgan's help. And he does badly want to win this race. Because those New Yorkers who challenged Figure, their horses have beat his best horse before. The only time a horse from his stable has ever been defeated. So this victory means a lot to him, and he's willing to deal with Morgan to get it. He refuses to give him Figure, but Morgan's got something else that he wants. And I think it's easy enough to guess what it is, given that a lot of the conflict between Justin and Kathleen was him wanting to wait to pay off her indenture. So it's easy enough to guess, but it's still heartwarming to see that they've got this secret going on of what he asked for. Kathleen doesn't even know yet. Well, they've got their work cut out for them if they're going to win this race. And they find that out when they're training on the track, and one of the New York horses breezes by and gets Figure to want to race him. Figure loses in the practice race, which was not even supposed to be a real race. That was a dirty trick on their part, getting him to run like that. But it did teach them that they need to do something different if they're going to win.
Bob, Figure didn't lose that race yesterday. You did. Or rather, I did. Where does he get his speed from? Well, from his hindquarters, of course. All those years of hauling and hill climbing, I don't know a horse with more thrust. And where were you sitting when you rode him? Figure's got a short back. And that means I was sitting right on top of all that power, just like an anchor, dragging him down. You're right, Justin.
That's something I had to learn with Bucky, was getting the right saddle for him. When I first got him, I used an English saddle, which there's nothing wrong with if you can do what English riders do. An English rider has to post, lift themselves up in rhythm with the trot. I suck at that. I will be honest. Plus, I'm a more timid rider. I need to get a saddle that I'm a little more secure in. The answer for Bucky and I was a Western saddle. And we had to go through a couple of them before we found one that worked. The first Western saddle that I used with him did not fit his back. Bucky is a pony. He's got a shorter back. And in the saddle I was in, I sat farther back on him. And I could not get him to trot hardly at all. And this is a pony that will trot all day in harness or all day in an English saddle. You can't wear this pony out. So we figured that the answer had to be in the saddle. And I have an excellent instructor who recognized where I was sitting on the horse, what I needed. And she's like, okay, let's go saddle shopping. And I found one that really worked well for both Bucky and I. So this addresses some real horsemanship, that it is important to get the right equipment. That's only one of the tricks that they gotta learn. They try different riding positions, they try different shoes. They do everything they can to get Figure ready for the big day, to give him every single advantage. Well, finally, the big day comes. You can see the others aren't exactly impressed by all that bucking and rearing and acting up. There's a reason for that. These horses that are doing that might look showy, they might look like older high energy, but they're running their race then and there. If you have a horse acting like that before a race, they're not going to win. They're spending all their energy before they need it. I've never bet on a horse race, but if I was going to, I'd be betting on the horse that walks quietly up to the starting line, nice and calm, saving their energy, listening to their handler. That's the horse that's going to win this. So you can see why they aren't exactly impressed. The first race, gets off to a bad start. The reason I say the first race is the agreement that Fisk had with New Yorkers was for 2 races. The first race, Figure gets blocked when the race starts because a dog happens to run out on the track. And Figure has to be pulled up so he doesn't trample the poor dog. But in spite of that, Figure wins. Makes up the distance, which nobody thought he could do. Even Justin Morgan himself said, we've got to get this race off to a fast start, take the lead right away if we're going to win this. But Figure still makes up that distance. Everybody's celebrating, but it's not over yet.
Incredible. Piercing. Yes? Somewhat early for such jubilation.
I should think you'd want to spend your time between races more fruitfully.
Between races?
If the good squire will read his agreement, he'll note that we specified the 2 races to be run at the time of our choosing. We choose now.
Let's give this a little bit of context. The stretch of road where this race took place still exists today. It's known as the Morgan Mile. And Figure really was asked to race one horse after another. Now, this is called the Morgan Mile because it's a mile-long stretch of road. The Kentucky Derby is a race that's run over 1.25 miles. Figure has just run almost a complete Kentucky Derby, and he's being asked to do it again. In these times, it's considered harsh on a horse to run the 3 races that make up the Triple Crown, because they are 3 long races that are weeks apart. And Figure's being asked to do this minutes after running a race that long. It's insane. Even by the standards of the time, everybody's saying, that's ridiculous. You can't ask him to run a race again. Besides having a bad start, the track is slop due to rain. It's nothing short of cruelty to ask it of him. But they don't really have an option at this point. So, the only answer is to match Figure up with a rider who really loves him. And everybody knows who that is.
Justin, this horse has given his all. He'll give more. He has to. Not to me, he won't. What are you talking about?
This horse has just run a race that no horse should ever have to run. It sapped his strength.
You just might go on hard.
Justin agrees to ride Figure in the race. And it's like everybody predicted. For him, Figure gives that extra. And he runs for him just as if this was the first race. There's no doubt anymore who the best horse is. And Fisk proudly goes over to collect his prize money. And to stick it in their faces a little bit that they aren't as high and mighty as they thought they were. But the thoroughbred owners from New York do have a little bit of a lesson for Fisk.
Your note for $1,000. I'd frame it, but then you 2 peacocks wouldn't have to pay, would you? What do you think of my mongrel horse now, huh?
Your horse, Squire?
Through working together to get Figure ready for the race, Fisk has seen just how close their bond is, and he knows Figure's never going to be the dream horse that he wants. Not for him. It's the bond between Figure and Justin that makes him so special. He's got natural ability, but of course, the love that's between the horse and his favorite human is what makes that extra little bit of magic. He knows what he's got to do. He gives Figure back to Justin, but there is a catch.
Squire Fisk, I know you for a shrewd Yankee trader that would rather turn purple than give away something for nothing. There's got to be a condition.
Condition indeed. I was just coming to that. Morgan, that horse of yours is one of a kind, but he won't be for long. I want the first coat.
Done.
It gets better than Fisk just getting the first colt. The 2 men have actually formed a friendship. Kathleen is now free of her indenture. Fisk was true to his word, and now she and Justin can marry, and they're gonna need to start a little livelihood for themselves. Fisk and Justin end up going into business together, raising horses.
There's a piece of land adjoining mine that I've had my eye on. Might be that you and me could get together on breeding the finest horse flesh anyone's ever heard of.
Morgan horses, by golly.
I bet they'll make wonderful children's horses.
Morgan never did officially go into business breeding horses. Not as his main livelihood. That was always going to be being a teacher and a composer. There are pieces of music by him that exist today yet, and I'm going to include the link to one of those songs in the description so you can see what kind of a composer he was. But now he did rent Figure out as a stallion to breed with different mares, the same as he rounded him out for work. And that was another remarkable thing about Figure, was his foals were just like him. The only difference might be in their coloring, but they all had that same type of build to them, that same compactness. They all had the same sweet, gentle temperament, the same level-headedness, and they were, and still are, wonderful children's horses. Now, if you want to know how things really went in the story, historically, it's not quite as happy as the movie. Justin Morgan was not a young man in the prime of life at the time that he acquired Figure. He was actually a man in his 50s, and he was in frail health, and Figure actually outlived him. But Figure did live to be 32, which, even by today's standards, is a good age for a horse. A few other questions that you might have after watching this are, okay, why aren't Morgans more popular? You don't see a lot of horses that look like Figure today. Well, there's a reason for that. Morgans are still popular horses. They're great for kids' horses, like I said. They're popular with somebody who wants to just have a horse to enjoy. You'll see them at driving shows sometimes, but not so much in the show ring as a jumper or as a dressage horse. Occasionally, but not all that often. Well, the reasons for that are people don't need an all-purpose horse as much anymore, and Morgans started to fall out of fashion. They were used for a long time as cavalry horses, as police mounts, but after that, they started to be replaced a bit by different types of horses who were more specialized. Thoroughbreds were bred to be faster and faster, and today no Morgan could keep up with one. If you're getting a horse these days, you're more likely to show with them, so horses who were bred to be better jumpers, have a bit more elegant look to them. They came to replace the Morgan to some extent. The first time I ever saw a real Morgan was at a carriage driving show that a lady that I knew took me to, and I said, those are saddlebreds, because they look just like the saddlebreds that I was taking riding lessons on. And she said, no, those are Morgans. Morgans today are bred to look more and more like saddlebreds and to move like saddlebreds. And I'm not saying anything against the saddlebred breed. Like I said, I learned to ride on saddlebreds. They're wonderful horses, but they have their own set of qualities. And I don't see the point in ruining what makes one breed special to make them like another breed. If you want a saddlebred, go get a saddlebred, but let Morgans be Morgans. Luckily, there are still people today who breed your classic type of Morgan or your Justin Morgan type of Morgan, as it's known. And these really are still everything that Figure was. I hope you've enjoyed this video, whether or not you're a horse nut like me or not. Maybe you learned a couple of things. I always enjoy being in professor mode, as I think of it. I hope to see you back next time, where I'll be talking about The Horse in the Gray Flannel Suit, which is a little bit more of an underrated Disney movie. And I'll talk about that at the time. See you then, and until next time, remember the magic.